All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving into some seriously mind-bending stuff. We're talking about the idea of actually programming the human mind. Yeah, you heard that right, using language.
Sounds crazy, right?
It kind of does, but when you think about it, I mean, words have power. They
Absolutely.
can make us feel things, think things, so maybe it's not so far-fetched after all.
Not at all. And that's exactly what we're digging into today. The whole idea of how language can shape our thoughts, even program our minds.
And we're basing this deep dive on an excerpt from this text called Programming the Human Mind with Cognitive Linguistics. I'm not going to lie, when I first saw that title, I was a little intimidated.
Yeah, I can see that.
But once I started reading, it was actually really fascinating.
It's a pretty dense topic for sure.
But like the core ideas are actually pretty simple.
Definitely. And once you grasp those, it kind of opens up a whole new way of looking at how our minds work.
So let's start with one of the key concepts from this excerpt, which is this idea of mental spaces. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. Basically, mental spaces are like these temporary mental constructs that our minds create. Little worlds, if you will.
Okay.
And we use these mental spaces to represent different situations, ideas, or knowledge domains. Think of it like this. If you're trying to decide where to eat dinner, you might picture different restaurants in your mind.
Gotcha. Like Italian, Thai.
Exactly. And you're not just thinking about the food, right? You're probably imagining the atmosphere of each place.
Yeah.
The smells, the sounds, the people. You might even imagine yourself enjoying a specific dish.
So I'm basically creating these little mental snapshots, these mental spaces for each restaurant.
Precisely. And each mental space is filled with different information, feelings, and sensory details. It's how our minds organize and make sense of the world around us.
That makes a lot of sense. And so cognitive linguistics argues that language can actually be used to shape these mental spaces.
Yes. The words we use can add details to these spaces. They can highlight certain features, even change the overall feel of these mental worlds.
So it's kind of like using words to redecorate those mental rooms we were talking about.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And the source mentions something called Neuro-linguistic Programming, or NLP, as one way to do this.
Right, NLP. I've heard that term thrown around before, but I'm not exactly sure what it means.
Well, in a nutshell, NLP focuses on the relationship between language patterns and thinking and behavior. It's all about how our thoughts, words, and actions are interconnected.
Okay.
And it explores techniques for consciously changing language to, in turn, shift thoughts and actions. For example, let's say someone has a fear of public speaking.
Yeah. I know a few people like that.
Well, NLP might use techniques like anchoring, which is where a positive feeling or memory is linked to a specific word or gesture.
Okay.
And the individual can then trigger that feeling when needed, like right before giving a presentation.
Wow, that's actually pretty clever.
It is, and it can be quite effective for a lot of people.
But it also sounds a little, I don't know, manipulative, almost like a mind control trick or something.
I can see how you'd get that impression. And to be honest, like any powerful tool, NLP can be used for good or ill. There's definitely potential for manipulation if these techniques are used without someone's awareness or consent. That's why it's so important to be aware of these things and approach them with caution.
Absolutely. Awareness is key. And speaking of manipulation, this all ties back to the idea of programming the mind, right? The idea that language can be used to influence our thoughts and behaviors in a deliberate way.
Exactly. And the source outlines 4 steps for doing this using cognitive linguistics.
Right.
And one of those steps that really stood out to me was the use of metaphors.
Metaphors. How do those work to program the mind?
Well, metaphors are incredibly powerful because they connect seemingly unrelated concepts, which can shift the way we think about things.
Okay. Can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's say you're working with someone who lacks confidence. You might use metaphors that compare them to, say, a strong, unyielding oak tree,
Oh, I see.
or maybe a soaring eagle.
I can see how hearing those comparisons repeatedly might start to shift how someone views themselves.
Exactly. The language starts to shape the mental space they inhabit. It subtly influences their self-perception. They begin to associate themselves with the strength and resilience of that oak, or the freedom and vision of the eagle.
That's pretty amazing. It's like using language to plant a seed in someone's mind that can then grow into something powerful.
Exactly. And it highlights just how potent language can be in shaping not only our thoughts, but our entire reality.
So to bring it all together, it seems like we're constantly creating these mental models of the world. And language plays a huge role in shaping those models.
Yes, absolutely. And that means we have a responsibility to be aware of the power of language. both in how we use it and how others use it to influence us.
It really makes you think about all the messages we're bombarded with every day in advertising, in the news, on social media. It's like, are we letting those messages unconsciously shape our mental spaces?
That's a really important question, and it's one that we should all be asking ourselves. If our minds are indeed being programmed in subtle ways, how can we become more conscious of these influences? How can we make intentional choices about the information we allow to shape our thinking?
That's a powerful thought. And it kind of makes me want to go back and re-examine all the messages I'm taking in, see how they might be shaping my own mental spaces, for better or worse.
That's a great idea. And who knows what mental spaces you might discover or create along the way. It's an ongoing journey of exploration. Understanding the power of language and how it shapes our inner worlds can be truly liberating.
Absolutely. It's like being aware of the programming allows us to rewrite the code and
Yeah.
build the mental realities we want.
Exactly. That's the beauty of it.
Well, on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today. I know my mind is definitely buzzing.
As always, it's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
Likewise. And for our listeners, if this conversation has piqued your interest, I highly recommend checking out the source material, Programming the Human Mind with Cognitive Linguistics. It's a fascinating read, even if it does sound a little sci-fi at first. But who knows, maybe those sci-fi concepts aren't so far from reality after all. Until next time, keep those mental spaces open and keep exploring the power of language.